Hello, and thank you for signing on to the Soil Connection, Unveiling the Impact of Agriculture on Our Health. On behalf of Grow Further, I'm delighted to welcome you all to this virtual discussion on the links between agriculture, soil health, and our gut microbiome. So go ahead and share with us in the chat, which part of the world are you calling from while I continue this discussion. I am Venkat Pegadaraju, Vice President of Development at Grow Further, a Seattle-based nonprofit organization. I'd go further. As some of you may know, we bring together farmers, scientists, and individuals to tackle one of the humanity's greatest challenges, ensuring sustainable food production in the face of climate change. And our approach is not just visionary, it's actionable. By harnessing the generous support of individuals and corporate donors, we transform ideas into impact. We fund innovative agriculture projects that deliver tangible results, including improved family health and nutrition, increase crop yields, and scalable solutions that can impact millions of lives across the globe. In addition to that, soil regeneration and soil health is one of our big focus areas that go further as well. Our mission also includes informing and engaging public on topics related to global food security and the importance of investing in agriculture research and development. So today's topic is particularly aligned with our mission as we focus on funding research that directly connects agriculture innovation with improvements in human health, and especially in the underserved regions. So this event is a part of our ongoing speaker series, wherein we bring together thought leaders to explore groundbreaking ideas and innovations that shape the future of agriculture and health. To receive updates on virtual sessions like this, please sign up for the Grow for This newsletter. Links to subscribe will be provided in the follow-up email after this event, or can also be found at growfurther.org. Additionally, if you'd like to learn more about Grow Further, we invite you to remain on this webinar. After our speakers finish, there will be an additional discussion following the main session. So let me just give you a quick overview of what to expect from today's discussion. Obviously, we are honored to be guided by the expertise of our acclaimed authors, David Montgomery and AnneBiklé. In their groundbreaking book, What Your Food Ate, they shed light on the intricate relationships between the health of our soil and the health of our bodies. So David and Anne, I want to share an interesting quote or saying from my own country, India, where it is said that Jaisa Ann Vaisa Man, and which means that what you eat is what your mind is. And it's kind of really reaffirming to hear that, through your extensive scientific research for both of you, what you have done. And I want to particularly, understand through our discussion today on how agriculture influences nutrient levels in food and the delicate balance of our gut microbiome. So for the benefit of audience, I think this session promises to deep dive into how the ground beneath our feet is intimately connected to our overall well-being from the food we eat and the microbiomes or the microorganisms that reside within us. So the gut microbiome, as some of you may be familiar with, is a diverse consortium of microorganisms in our intestines. It's crucial for maintaining the digestion, the immune function, and even the mental health. However, years of soil degradation have led to a significant reduction in the nutrient content of our food. So today's conversation will focus on the critical links between farming practices, the soil health, and the microbiome. We will explore how agricultural methods impact microbial diversity of the soil and how these changes are reflected in human gut health. We'll examine topics such as soil health, nutrient density, and the role of soil microbes in human well-being, and the connections between gut health and the chronic diseases. So without further ado, it's my pleasure and honor to welcome both of our panelists today. David Montgomery is a MacArthur Fellow and a professor of geomorphology at the University of Washington. He's an internationally recognized geologist who studies the effect of geological processes on ecological system and human societies. He's an author of several textbooks in this field and has worked. His work has been featured in the documentary films, network cable newses, TV, radio shows, including Nova, PBS NewsHour, Fox and Friends, and All Things Considered. So, David, welcome to our show today. I'm really excited to have this discussion with you today. Joining David is yet another accomplished individual, AnneBiklé. She's a science writer and a biologist. She explores humanity's tangled relationship with nature through the lens of agriculture, soil, and food. She's particularly enthralled with the botanical world and its influence on humanity throughout the history. Her writings has appeared in digital, print magazines, newspapers, and her work has been featured in radio and independent documentary films. So both Anne and David are married and they live in Seattle, Washington. Their most recent collaboration is What Your Food Ate and How to Heal Our Land and Reclaim Our Health, which builds on the trilogy of books about soil health and microbe farming. Some of you may be familiar with the dirt, the soil of erosions, the hidden half of nature, and the growing revolution. So it's my pleasure to invite both David and Anne to our discussion today. They will take us through this discussion focusing on the key topics that directly influence our health and the sustainability of agriculture. David and Anne, just a quick request, since Grow Further is a global organization, we work in developing countries to help farmers, smallholder farmers to adapt to best practices. So it will be really helpful to kind of highlight and how your work, particularly in terms of soil health and in the developing countries, could have an impact on the local populations there. And so it would be much appreciated by Grow Further and also by our audience. So without further ado, so David and Anne, take it away. I'll probably come back towards the end of our discussion to get the Q&A session started. So show is yours.
Okay, Venkat. Well, thank you very much, and thank you for allowing us to share some of our work with the folks that you have at Grow Further. We're big fans of what you're doing around the world, and are very supportive. I'm a geologist by background training. Anne is a biologist by background and training, and we've been on an intellectual journey really for the last 20 years, learning about how the connections between the way that we treat the land ends up affecting how the land treats us in the end, both in terms of our ability to sustain farming and also in what's in what we eat and how that matters to our health. So we're going to try and give you the quick overview of what we've been working on for some time now through via the books that we've written. And how it's going to work is I'm going to start, and then about halfway through, I'm going to disappear, and Anne will replace me, and she'll finish the second half of the talk, because everything that we're going to be talking about today really has been a group effort. And it's really, when you think about what makes for healthy, fertile soils, it's on the boundary, on the frontier between geology and biology. So we've put our minds together on this, and we've been working on it for a while, and I'll start sharing my slides and get into it about halfway through. I'll hand off to Anne to finish up. So here we go. All right. So Venkat, these are the four books that Venkat mentioned in his introduction. The first one that I wrote was called "Dirt: The Erosion of Civilizations," and that's a problem definition of really how the way that people have treated land in the past has affected the longevity of their societies. That's the kind of book you might expect a geologist to write about soil, very backwards looking through history. But it really illustrated to me that we have a major problem with how we've been treating our land through our agricultural history. Anne and I then looked into how we might be able to solve that and wrote The Hidden Half of Nature together, which is a deep dive into looking at the role of microbial life, bacteria and fungi, and all the life in the soil and how that affects and is really the foundation for soil fertility, and was our sort of education in terms of, oh, well, what really is soil health? What drives it? Growing a Revolution was a book I wrote after The Hidden Half of Nature that interviewed farmers from around the world in West Central Africa, Central America, across North America, farmers who had restored fertility to their land. And it was an exploration of how can regenerative farming regenerate the fertility of soils. And then the most recent book, What Your Food Ate, really illustrates, I think, the stakes for people on an individual basis in terms of what it is getting into our food and how that reflects our farming practices. So my job today is to give you the quick overview of essentially the problem definition and some of the how-to, and then Anne's going to talk much more about the microbial world and the parallels between the human gut and the soil in the second half of the talk. So to boil down a whole lot of work into sort of a single quote from the United Nations, today humanity loses about 0.3%, about a third of a percent of our global food production capacity each and every year to soil erosion and degradation, the degradation of soil health. That 0.3% on a global scale doesn't sound like a huge amount in any given year, but it can really add up. that means that we're on track over the course of this century to lose about a third of our food production capacity as our population continues to rise. This is soil degradation is a global problem with long-term implications. Um, and what is it that has essentially set us on a trajectory of soil degradation, literally since the dawn of agriculture? And ironically enough, the invention of the plow fundamentally altered the balance between soil production and soil erosion on the lands that we tend to grow our food on, dramatically increasing soil erosion. Very few natural environments have bare soil at the surface. Typically, it's fairly arid environments where that is the case. Nature tends to clothe herself in plants, and there's lots of reasons for that. Plants help to build soil fertility, and it turns out, in the end, they have a lot of help from the microbial world in the soil. And we'll be going much more into that as we go along. But to summarize, the state where we are today in terms of soil health globally, I know of no other single statistic than this comparison that in terms of its gross impact. Today, modern agriculture loses about an inch of soil in about 20 years. That's a global average from a extensive compilation of modern studies that I did back when I was writing the Dirt book. But an inch of soil loss in every 20 years translates into about a millimeter of soil loss on average a year off of farms. That doesn't sound like all that fast, a millimeter a year. It takes about 20 years to lose enough soil to be about the length of your thumb in that case. Uh, but when you compare that to how fast nature rebuilds soils, it takes nature 500 to 1,000 years, centuries, to rebuild that inch of topsoil that modern farming loses in a decade or two, in a couple decades. Therein lies a problem, and that's the basic problem I wrote about in the Dirt book, the loss of soil as it's integrated over society after society around the world, and the severe consequences that's had for the descendants who are continuing to farm degraded land. But it's not just soil loss that has affected agricultural productivity. It's also soil degradation that had degraded soil health and resulted in the loss of soil organic matter, which turns out is the foundation for healthy, fertile soils. There was a paper published back in 2015 in the journal Sustainability that integrated the state of soils across North America. And they concluded that the soil organic matter content, and when we think soil organic matter, recall that soil organic matter is roughly half carbon, about 60% carbon. The carbon content of many soils in North America is only about half of the level present at the time they were converted from forests or prairies to farmlands. And if you look globally, that roughly a 50% loss in soil organic matter is a pretty good number for agricultural soils all around the world. We've been eroding our topsoil and we've been degrading its health through the loss of soil organic matter. In some places for just a few years, if farming has just started, other places for centuries, and this has affected human populations in many ways, a myriad of ways I write about in the Dirt book. But to sum up sort of where we're at today, the degradation and loss of soil that's occurred in regions around the world and globally is really due to two key aspects of modern farming. Modern farming. Heavy routine tillage is a recipe for losing soil. Why? Well, have a look at this freshly plowed, freshly worked field in California. Imagine what would happen if you got a good afternoon rainfall on that field. The runoff would be brown, carrying away the topsoil. That's a big driver of what has happened on farms around the world. But the overuse of synthetic nitrogen fertilizers is also a major contributing source to the degradation of soil organic matter. And so, if we look at two of the primary practices in modern conventional farming, it's these two, and they tend to degrade the soil both through its loss and in the degradation of soil organic matter. And this is, we go through the peer-reviewed literature behind those assertions in our books. There's very solid evidence that the over-tilling and the over-application of synthetic fertilizers has contributed to the loss and degradation of the world's agricultural soils. So when I got to the point of finishing writing the Dirt book, I started to ask myself, can we actually reverse the historical pattern and loss that I traced through society after society? And if so, how fast might we do it? And I'm happy to tell you that I'm absolutely convinced that we can indeed reverse the historical pattern of soil loss and degradation, and that we can do it remarkably fast, that this can be done through changes in farming practices that can rebuild soil fertility uh, in years to decades, not centuries, and can do it in a way that's profitable for farmers and results in more nutrient-dense food for the people growing food on subsistence farms, but also for the public at large, fed by large farms. So how might that be done? I learned a lot from visiting farmers around the world writing Growing a Revolution. I'm not a farmer, I'm a geologist by background, but I have ears and I can listen to farmers and understand what it is they've been doing to their land and soil and observe the results of what they've been doing. So I took on the project in writing Growing a Revolution to visit farmers around the world who had restored fertility to their land in fairly rapid order and in very different environments and contexts, and tried to look at, well, what are the generalities behind what they're doing and how does it work? And what I found was that regenerative farming practices can restore soil fertility remarkably fast, can regenerate the fertility of the soil in years to decades in ways that can not only prove profitable for farmers, but can also put a whole lot of carbon back in the ground. Because remember that soil organic matter is roughly half carbon. So farming practices that can enhance the fertility of our land by putting organic matter back in the soil can also help with the climate problem, but they can also help with farm profitability and the issue of how can we sustainably feed the world? Because as I showed earlier on with that UN report, we're on track to degrade our ability to feed the world as a consequence of degrading our agricultural soils. And this is something that we can and should turn around. But to do so, we have to change how we think about farming. In conventional agriculture, the primary emphasis is placed on agrochemistry, on synthetic fertilizers and synthetic pesticides, which can be useful for promoting yields on degraded land or constraining a pest outbreak, but the routine reliance on agrochemical methods leads to soil degradation, which then leads to greater need for more synthetic agrochemicals. There's a different way to think about it, though. And that's the philosophy behind regenerative agriculture, which emphasizes cultivating soil life and building healthy, fertile soils, taking degraded land and making it verdant once again. And I know this is possible because I've been on farms around the world that have actually done it, and done it in remarkably short order. And so I'll share with you a few simple uh, lessons of that from farmers that I visited when I basically took 6 months away from the university where I teach and visited farmers in West Central Africa, Central America, across North America, who had been doing regenerative farming practices that rebuilt the fertility of their land in short order. And now they all had different practices, as you might imagine, people in different settings would. But they all followed a set of principles that are oriented towards cultivating beneficial life in the soil. And those principles of regenerative agriculture that were the common elements among the farmers that I found who had been very successful at rebuilding the fertility and profitability of their farms, were that they minimized the physical and chemical disturbance of the soil. And so that translates into either low tillage or no-till practices, but basically ditching the plow and stopping, routine physical disturbance of the soil. Think what happens to soil life and organisms with a plow, for example. It's kind of like if somebody came to your house, took the roof off once a year, and stirred all your stuff up with a giant spoon. It's not conducive to stability. So minimizing disturbance is sort of the first principle of regenerative agriculture. Keeping the soil always covered with living plants is the second principle. And Anne will go into how that works, but it turns out that crops and plants enter into symbiotic, mutually beneficial relationships with organisms in the soil, and keeping living roots in the soil is the key to actually maintaining those mutually beneficial relationships. And what does that mean in practice? It means not having fallow periods. It means having cover crops planted in between cash crops, either literally between rows of cash crops or in a rotation. And it also means growing a diversity of crops, because the third principle of regenerative agriculture is to diversify crop rotations. And that is essentially, for North American audiences, that means not just growing corn and soybeans, And for global audiences, it can mean either growing a whole diversity of crops in the field all at once, as one of the farmers I'll show you in a minute in West Africa has been doing, or having a diversity of crops in one's crop rotation. But having a diversity of plants growing on the same piece of ground in succession um, is really the third key. The fourth principle of regenerative agriculture that we like to talk about is the reintegration of animals into cropping systems via their grazing off either cover crops or crop stubble and manuring fields. I've visited farmers who've been very successful at rebuilding the fertility of their land who did not reintegrate animals into their practices. But what I've found is that if done right, reintegrating animal husbandry can greatly accelerate rebuilding soil fertility and provide additional profitability to farms where it's done right. Now, all this goes to show that, or to argue that these practices that follow these principles are really kind of the opposite of what we've taught in conventional agriculture for the last 100 years, with intense routine tillage, the reliance on synthetic agrochemicals to maintain fertility and suppress pests, and to specialize in just growing a few specialty crops on a field, well, one or a couple. This is really a different way to think about the soil in the process of farming, but I've been very impressed with how it works. But this is a philosophy where the general principles do translate to other settings, or are generalizable to different settings, but the specific practices in different regions need to be tailored to the specific setting, to the crops people want to grow, to the climate that they're in. Growing crops in the tropics, you're dealing with different soils than you are in the temperate zone or in the high latitudes. But these general principles of minimizing disturbance, maximizing diversity, and keeping the ground covered with living plants, and then, if a farmer wants to, reintegrating animal husbandry in a regenerative fashion. That's a recipe for really turning the clock, turning around this centuries-long pattern of soil degradation to grow healthy, fertile soils that then translate into more profitable farms, more carbon in the ground, and more nutrient-dense food. So let me give you an example of some of the farms I've been on or that demonstrate the power of these kind of principles in practice. This shows you two soils from David Brandt's farm in Carroll, Ohio. David was a farmer who I interviewed while writing Growing a Revolution, who had in 1971 started farming with soil that looked a lot like this khaki colored soil that looks kind of hard and crusty. That's the soil from his neighbor's farm, which is much like the soil when David started back in 1971. But the soil on David Brandt's farm now is this dark brown, black stuff. He's basically turned this khaki stuff into this rich, fertile soil over the course of a few decades. Now, he started as a no-till farmer and then eventually got into using cover crops and then diversifying his cover crops. He sort of pioneered these kind of regenerative techniques in his corner of Ohio, really restored fertility to his land to the point where he's now much more profitable than his conventional farming neighbors. And so let me share you a little bit about the economics of his operation. In his county, with his neighbor's field over there across the road with those yellowing soybeans, the county average for growing corn in this case, they'd be doing full-on plowing and tillage with 200 pounds of nitrogen per acre and 2.5 quarts of glyphosate or Roundup per acre. The total would cost the typical conventional farmer in David's neighborhood about $500 per acre. They were yielding 100 bushels an acre the year that I visited, and at $4 a bushel that they were getting that year, his conventional neighbors were losing $100 an acre on, for every acre, $100 for every acre of corn they planted. That's a bad business model. Even a geologist can tell you that that's a bad business model. David and that illustrates one of the things that North American farmers are squeezed between: the high reliance on expensive inputs and diesel, and low prices that they get for their crop. David was doing in his 44-year no-till fields that he added cover crops and diversity over the last decade to. He's not tilling, so he saves 50% on his diesel bill straight out of the door. He's using about 1/8 of the nitrogen as his conventional neighbors, and he's using less than half of the pesticides. Now, before he up until the last couple of years after Growing a Revolution, David managed to essentially wean himself off of almost all the nitrogen and glyphosate. But back in 2015, when he was sharing these numbers, he was spending less per acre to grow more. He was spending $320 per acre to grow 180 bushels an acre, which is that $4 a bushel cost that he was getting back then. He was profiting $400 an acre. And I share all this detail with you to basically point out that these regenerative practices and principles, illustrated by this tillage radish, this cover crop that David is showing off in this field, can be not only more profitable for farmers, but can produce higher yields. We don't face a choice between feeding the world and going for more environmentally friendly farming. That environmental interests and economics line up in this case. And David's case is not unique. This data shows you a graph from a paper by Claire Lacan and Jonathan Lundgren, who back in 2018 published it in the journal Peer J. What it illustrates is a comparison of the economics of conventional and regenerative corn growing in the American Corn Belt. The bar graph shows you the revenue and cost per hectare for the average of a series of, I think it was 20 conventional farms and 20 regenerative farms. And how you read the graph is that the bar all the way up to the top tells you how much they harvested off their fields. Notice that the regenerative farming actually harvested more, they harvested more off of their fields. The colors show you how much they spent to do so. So each of the different things they spent money on is shown over here on the right. You'll notice that the regenerative fields spent far less on fertilizer. They spent less on crop insurance. They spent less on patented seeds. But the point is after if you take what they harvested off their fields, take off what they spent, the regenerative fields were more profitable by almost 40% than their conventional neighbors. This is when I started to actually become a real optimist about the power of regenerative agriculture to really reshape agriculture in a more environmentally friendly way, because when environmental interests start to line up with economic interests, it's a powerful agent for change. And these regenerative farming principles that build soil health are not just applicable to big North American farms. I also went to West Central Africa and visited this gentleman here, Kofi Boa, who runs the No-Till Center for Research in Kumasi, Ghana. And look at his hat. He gets it. Got dirt, get soil. He's all about building healthy soils, and he does it around his community in Kumasi, in Ghana, through growing multiple crops in the same field all at once. Notice that there's no bare ground. Everything's covered with mulch, and there's three crops in this particular field that I can identify. They'll grow up to 8 different crops in the same field. They get their diversity through in the ground all at once. They are not tilling anymore. And what did that do? When Kofi taught the villagers around his village to move from their traditional style of slash and burn agriculture, where they would clear a field, burn it, farm it for a couple years, and then once they exhausted the soil, move to another spot to clear more forest. When they ran out of forest to clear, they're faced with declining soils, because if you continually slash and burn on the same piece of land, you degrade the soil very quickly through both erosion and loss of organic matter. Kofi taught them how to basically farm with no-till methods and with cover crops. They get their diversity in by growing it all at the same time in their fields. What did that do to their agriculture? Well, what happened to erosion, which had been a huge problem for them, is that they virtually took erosion down to background soil building levels. They turned erosion off. Why? By keeping the ground covered. It's fairly simple. In terms of their yields, their traditional yields, they were getting 1.5 tons of corn and about 0.8 tons per hectare of cowpeas. When they went to this no-till with diversity and minimal chemical use, they basically tripled their cowpea harvest. So basically, they doubled their cowpea harvest. Sorry, they tripled their corn harvest and they doubled their cowpea harvest. My point being that by changing how they think about the soil, without really spending more to actually to farm, but changing their practices, these farmers in West Central Africa were able to greatly increase their harvests, which had a major economic impact on the farmers in Kofi's area, a major beneficial impact. So what are some of the benefits of healthy soils? Well, I put higher farmer profits at the top of the list because I think that's the foremost motivator for agricultural change. Is if it's good for the farmers and good for the farm, that's going to motivate adoption. And if it's also really good for the environment, it can help spur that. And why was it more profitable? They used less fertilizer, less pesticide, and less fossil fuels, radically cutting their costs. to harvest comparable yields, that's a recipe for a more profitable farm. But it also leaves more carbon in the soil. Those, the color difference on the soils from David Brandt's farm, that is putting carbon in the soil. And healthy, fertile soils that are rich in soil organic matter hold better retain the moisture that falls on them. And contribute to climate resilience, and it also results in less off-site pollution. The single best way to reduce off-site nitrate and phosphate pollution from agricultural regions is to use less synthetic fertilizer in the first place. So I'm going to basically turn everything over here to Anne at this point, and she's going to take you more into the realm of microbial ecology and what we learned in writing The Hidden Half of Nature and What Your Food Ate. So I'll turn it over to her now.
All righty. Hello, everybody. So I think you can see that definitely in the sort of journey of writing these books, it was inevitable that it was going to lead to what your food ate, because this is really what's at stake with how we grow our food and how we, get that food to the table and onto our plates. And this book, really, What Your Food Ate, was an exploration of how do the things that are fundamental to human health make it into the plant and animal foods of the human diet. And I'm going to kind of hit the high level point initially here, and then I'm going to unpack some of the details behind this. And really what it comes down to with sort of these connections between agriculture and human health are that there's these four sort of categories of compounds and nutrients. David and I call them the Fab Four. It's easy to remember. We've got it down now. And for anyone out there who's a Beatles fan, you can also may recognize the term from that. In any event, the Fab Four are micronutrients. So these are vitamins and also nutrients like iron or zinc, selenium, things that we need in very small quantities, but they're very important to human physiology and human biology. Fat balance, here we're talking about how the animal diet influences the composition of fats in meat and milk. And then third down there, phytochemicals. So these are naturally occurring compounds that plants make using all this energy that they obtain from photosynthesis. And they do a number of things in the bodies of crops as well as our own. And then lastly, microbial metabolites. This is a whole new area in human health for sure. Plant scientists have known about microbial metabolites for a long time, and it turns out they're instrumental to health. I'm going to focus really on phytochemicals and microbial metabolites for the remainder of this talk, but I do want you to know that the micronutrients and fat balance are also very important. So the Fab Four, this is the other key thing about them. Human biology is good at a lot of things. For example, we can take carbohydrates in as a part of our diet and break the molecules down and reassemble other compounds that our bodies need. But with the Fab Four, we cannot do that. We cannot manufacture iron or zinc through human biology, nor do we make phytochemicals. We rely on our crops and also our animal foods for that. And of course, we're not microbes. We cannot make microbial metabolites. We have to rely on our microbiome for that. So that's what is key about the Fab Four. They're only in the human diet. And this led David and I to ask then, of course, the obvious question is, how do farming practices affect the Fab Four? So I'm going to cut to the chase on this. And as a part of the book, we did an investigation. And we had 10 paired farms shown, the locations of which are shown on this map here. They spanned from number 10 there, from the East Coast in Connecticut, all the way over to California. And these paired farms, there was one conventional and one regenerative. And we worked with the farmers and had them grow the same crops. And then we did an analysis of what is in those crops. So this is getting at nutrient density. And one of the things that's key about the differences between conventional and regenerative practices is how much soil organic matter are we looking at in the soils in which these crops are raised. And so we know about a lot of biomarkers in human health, things like blood sugar, blood pressure. If there's one biomarker in soil that's really important to pay attention to, it would be organic matter. And you can see down here in the lower left that there is, over twice the amount of soil organic matter some of these on these regenerative farms compared to conventional. And that also led directly to why the soil health scores were so much higher on these regenerative farms. So specifically, these were some of our findings. I mentioned phytochemicals before, of course. And so what we found, average difference between conventional and regenerative crops, the crops that we analyzed are shown there on the left, cabbage, corn, and so on. Average difference in these phytochemicals, about 15 to 20% more in the regenerative crops. Micronutrients, about the same range. Soil health scores, wow, 30% to 2.5 times higher soil health scores on these regenerative farms. All right, so indeed, the bottom line here is farming practices do matter to the Fab4 and their levels in foods of the human diet. Now, I'm now going to kind of transition into how does this all work and why is it important that we understand how things work. And microbiomes are really the key to a lot of this. What are they? These are just quite simply, these are the microbiota that are indigenous to their hosts. And what this means is they're supposed to be there. We would be profoundly unhealthy without our microbes, most of which in the human body are located in the lower part of our gut. And what we know about microbiomes is that they dovetail with host cells, whether you're a human, a bird, a crop, a cow. There's a long, long coevolution between host microbiomes and their host. And critical to microbiome functioning and health host is the transformative processing that all of these microbes do with nutrients in the diet of their hosts, and I'll get into that. So I just wanted to provide a little summary there. So the heart of the crop microbiome, it's what I call a biological bazaar. And most of that crop microbiome is in a very special place, a wild and alive place, in fact, beneath our feet, called the rhizosphere. And you can picture this as just a halo-shaped zone, very, very close to all of the roots in the entire root system of a plant. And this is if you were to blow up that area so that we could see it better in the rhizosphere and out at the tips of roots, what you have, look at this. These plant roots are coated and swathed with microbes. And there's a lot of reasons for this. I'll go into just a few, but first of all, what we know as a part of the communities around plant roots, they are made of what I call fetching fungi. This is a particular group of fungi, the mycorrhizal fungi. And they are attached at one end, either on the outside or often inside of roots with one end. And then they are prospecting far, far away from roots because they're gathering things and bringing them back to the plants. What kinds of things? One of the most important nutrients, and you farmers out there and agronomists know this, is phosphorus. And these fungi are collecting phosphorus out in the soil and they're bringing it back and they're making it available to their crop hosts in the forms that crop hosts can take in. And what drives all of this, whether it's the fetching fungi or the bacteria, are exudates. And so crops have a monopoly on sunshine. Plants are the only organisms that can photosynthesize, and they use that energy to produce exudates. These exudates are flowing out of their roots into the rhizosphere. And this is breakfast, lunch, and dinner for the crop microbiome. This is what these microbes are subsisting on, what they're thriving on, are these exudates. But it is no free lunch. In exchange for the exudates, as I'd mentioned, fungi need to hand over the phosphorus to get exudates. On the part of bacteria, they are making all kinds of metabolites, either directly from exudates or with the energy they get from the exudates. So what are some of these microbial metabolites? Plant growth promoting hormones. Defensive compounds that can turn on root pathogens, meaning keep them at bay, kill them off, keep them away from their plant host. So really and truly, this place beneath our feet is quite special, and it's paramount that we let it function as it's supposed to. In fact, the rhizosphere is said to be one of the most life-dense places we know about on the planet. All right, this is just a close-up of some of these fetching fungi. That's their hyphae out in mineral soil, picking up phosphorus and other things and taking them to their plant host. Exudates, I want to emphasize, are very important to the nourishment of the crop microbiome. Plants will put out anywhere 30 to 40% of their energy to make these exudates. That's huge, and it tells you how important exudates are to plant health because of how these exudates are nourishing the crop microbiome and what the crop microbiome is doing for the host. A little bit on phytochemicals, just to get you some quick background here. So phytochemicals, as I had said, naturally occurring chemicals that all plants make. It's essential really to a sedentary lifestyle. These phytochemicals, these are just a few up here. Linalool, for example, is found in many herbs, like lavender is one. Sulforaphane is found in our brassica crops. Curcumin is in the root turmeric. And what are these phytochemicals doing for crops? They're involved in all of these functions in communication, defense, and protection. We've long known they're involved in defense and protection. And what's becoming even more clear is that phytochemicals are really the way that plants are communicating with their microbiome, with other plants. It's very important. All right, I want to just take you down a little bit into the proverbial weeds here with the crop microbiome. Let's drop on down to that bottom row where you see the crop barley. In the root exudates of barley are phenolics. This is a huge group of phytochemicals, also known as polyphenols. And so when phenolics are in root exudates of barley, it results in an increase in the populations of a bacterium, the Pseudomonas fluorescens group. When you have lots of those type of bacteria, move over to the outcome column, what you're getting is a big decrease in the pathogen, Pythium ultimum. This is a pathogen where you go out to your crops one day and you are aghast. They are in a pool of just, they've dissolved. This is root rot and crown rot. This is a bad, bad pathogen. But if you're feeding your Pseudomonas populations in the soil, that area around the rhizosphere, this is what helps keep Pythium away from your crops. So in essence, what I'm really saying here is that the biological bazaar, the crop microbiome, this is a health plan for soil and crops. And we all know that health is one of the best defenses against disease, against ailments, against early death. And this is really important, as all farmers know, because with unhealthy crops, they're more susceptible to all of these pests and pathogens. That is hitting your yield. That is hitting your bottom line. So if you can recruit the crop microbiome and get them on your side, you're going to be doing a lot better off with regard to yield, and you're also most likely not going to be spending as much on inputs. All right, another biological bazaar is right down there in the human gut. Most of the human microbiome is not up in our stomach. It's down in the place we never like to talk about. I call it the colon. right? This is the basement of our gut, but this is where the main action is. And to understand why, look at how the numbers of bacteria increase as you move down the digestive tract. This is why the colon is where the action is with regard to the human microbiome. It is, in fact, another biological bazaar. And with the human microbiome, here's what we know. Every single one of us has a unique composition, unique communities of bacteria, fungi, even viruses and more that make up our human microbiome. The genes of all of these microbes vastly outnumber human genes. And we also know that down there in the colon, many of these microbes thrive on phytochemicals and fiber. Give you an idea what that looks like. Here is the banquet table down there in the colon. These are bacteria. They've just been colorized to make them easier to see here, and they are on that piece of fiber, getting their nourishment out of that, transforming it into things that, as you'll see, are good for the human host. I want to talk now, I've been talking about fiber and phytochemicals and crops. I don't want to neglect that we have another biological bazaar that is very important to human health. And that is, in contrast to our digestive tract, that of ruminants. So this is cows, sheep, and goats. All the action for them is at the very upper end of the digestive tract. And you can just see from this illustration what a large part of the digestive tract their biological bazaar takes up. In essence, these animals are, in a sense, these walking compost heaps, really. And the rumen and all of the microorganisms there are very sensitive to what an animal's diet consists of. And this is in part why a diet of living plants with an abundance of phytochemicals is really important for the animal diet, and really a minimum of seeds and grains, which can really wreak havoc on the rumen. And so the question that this brought David and I to in the book is, I mean, what if we farmed and ranched in ways that fed these biological bazaars, in ways that fed the microbiomes of all of these different hosts, plant, animal, and people? So here's how it kind of all comes together. Phytochemical sources, all these polyphenols, all of these other phytochemicals that are in plant foods, they come into the diet of our animals. They come into the human diet. We eat them. They descend down to the basement of our digestive tract, to where our human microbiome is. And here's what happens. This is another case of microbial metabolites. Human microbiome is taking elements of the human diet, fiber, phytochemicals, even things that come in animal foods, and turning them into metabolites that, it turns out, have all of these beneficial effects on the right hand side of the slide. There's a lot of details behind this, which metabolites come from which phytochemicals and so on. But I don't know about you, but I like everything I am seeing on the right hand side there. Anti-inflammation, brain health, regular nervous system, and so on. All right, one last detail on the microbial metabolites is here. We know that there are, one of the biggest areas and the most is known about a group of microbial metabolites called short chain fatty acids. There's about 3 different types. Let's just take the row second up from the bottom, the butyrate propionate compound. This is microbial metabolite made from fiber, phytochemical rich diet. I really like that benefit in the middle column. Look at that. We're decreasing inappropriate inflammation. Many of the chronic diseases plaguing Western populations on our planet today are due to misguided, perturbed, disturbed inflammation. We know that butyrate, in particular, it activates a part of our immune system that is these T cells. A lot more in the hidden half of nature on this, as well as in what your food ate. But anyway, here's the upshot on many of these microbial metabolites. I love the word normal. We don't need super anything. We need normal metabolism. We need actually optimal inflammation, not too much, not too little, and at the right time. And we, of course, want our brains to be functioning throughout our lifetimes. And so the bottom line here, this is a huge part of our physical and well-being and how the human microbiome is, is integrating with the soil and crop microbiome. And this indeed is a part of our health plan. There it is, right there in the plant and animal foods of the human diet, but depending on our farming practices. So we want to be nourishing these microbiomes in our crops and our animals. Okay, we have thrown a lot at you indeed. And I guess if I was going to sum it up in the simplest way possible, I would put it this way. What's good for the soil, our crops, and our livestock is good for us too. All right, thank you.
All right, all right. Thank you very much, Anne.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think both David and Anne really appreciate this conversation. Your dialogue reinforces that by improving soil health and promoting sustainable farming practices, we are not only enhancing the nutrient density of crops, but also strengthen the overall health of the populations. So investing in these innovations help address chronic diseases and malnutrition in developing regions where agriculture forms the backbone of both food security and public health. So this is what makes the work of Grow Further so important. So now we would love to open up the floor for some questions. And so feel free, audience, to submit any questions that you may have through the chat portal or through the Q&A, and then we'll get through them as many as we can. So I think we have about maybe 10, 15 minutes for this. So let me go and look at for some questions here that have been posed. Okay, so so where is this? Okay, will you be discussing how pesticides? Okay, so that's already been discussed. I thought I saw a question.
Yeah, I've already answered some of these questions in
Oh, so that's why they've disappeared. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So maybe Peter, I think there might be a question that might be relative to Grow Further here, like in terms of how should a family that can't afford organic food keep their microbiome healthy, and how can society bring down the cost of the organic foods?
Well, that's a great question. Unfortunately, the regenerative practices are not always clearly labeled in consumer-facing foods in the way that organic is labeled. So you can see on the label whether something is organic, meaning that it was grown without chemical fertilizers and pesticides, and non-GMO, but you can't see whether it was grown using conservation agriculture practices that built up soil, that built up organic matter in the soil. So it's difficult unless you grow your own foods or know the farmer to get that full information. And it doesn't necessarily cost more to grow foods using carbon and soil organic matter friendly practices. But unfortunately, it's hard to tell as a consumer how it's been done. There are definitely things that consumers can do in terms of without necessarily increasing the cost. So switching some of the food budgets from processed sodas to fruits and vegetables, that type of thing. On a societal or public policy level, there's several things that can be done to bring down the cost of organic foods, other than simply expanding the market, which has been happening over the last few decades. One of them is to do more research. Grow Further funds agricultural R&D, and it has a great track record of bringing down the cost of food. A relatively small fraction of R&D is associated with organic and regenerative agriculture, and increasing that fraction could help to bring down the costs. Another public policy to bring down costs is improving financing for organic farming. In many cases, there's an upfront cost associated with upfront farming, but in the long term, building a healthy soil actually lowers the cost. So if there are financing mechanisms available to cover some of that gap, then that can bring down the cost of organic food as well.
Oh, great comments, Peter. I was actually going to ask you a follow-up question on policy, which you already have addressed. So David and Anne, do you have anything further more to add to what Peter has already talked about?
I don't, I think a part of that question was, how do we try and ensure health of the human microbiome? And one way we can do that is by not purchasing foods that are known to sort of impair some of the normal functions of the human microbiome. And this is in large part what the problem with so many heavily processed foods is that not only have fiber and phytochemicals for the most part been removed from these foods, but also other things have been put in, emulsifiers, additives, and so on. And there's evidence that what has gotten put into some of these foods is disturbing the human microbiome down there in the colon. So you can save your money and your microbiome by really reducing purchasing of those kinds of foods and transitioning over to whole plant foods, because this is where the fiber and phytochemicals are found. And I know that meat is one of the more expensive parts of the human diet, but there are many seeds and grains and fruits and vegetables that are not as expensive. And with a little bit of skill in the kitchen, and if you don't have skills, there's a lot of places that you can get these skills and start thinking about, what is my microbiome like to eat today? And then go from there. So that's just kind of the comment on that topic.
Excellent. Excellent. Thanks, Anne. I have another question. Maybe this is for David. So David, for farmers interested in transitioning to regenerative methods, what are the most critical first steps you would recommend they take at the beginning of rebuilding their soil fertility and biodiversity?
Well, the first step I would recommend would be to try and find out who in their region, with growing the kind of crops that they're thinking about growing, so in sort of their local context, has actually been experimenting with and trying these methods, because the sort of the regional adaptation and trying to find a system that will work for farmers on the ground has taken some experimentation, some trial and error. And you might as well learn from other people's mistakes before making your own. It's a fairly good philosophy. And along those lines, it'd be like in thinking about the transition. If you have soil that has been, intensively synthetically fertilized for a long time, you probably and therefore does not have a lot of organic matter. You probably don't want to be planting nitrogen-hungry crops straight out of the gate. You want to plant something that will build some soil nitrogen before you then try and build the nitrogen-hungry crops. So there's some sequencing issues in terms of how to go about it. The other thing I would definitely recommend to most farmers is to try out these more regenerative techniques on a portion of their farm and get some experience with them. Don't bet the farm on a transition to something you haven't tried before. Go in 1 foot at a time and try and figure out what is working to build soil health on your farm in a way that would work for you. So, doing your homework in terms of what has been done in a region. Now, that said, there are a number of fairly credible regenerative crop advisors now, that people who can advise people through the transition. And Peter is absolutely right in identifying that transition period as sort of a key one, both for in sense of learning, but also in terms of the financing, because if a farmer can make it through the transition and not lose money and be far better off on the far side of it, it's how you navigate that transition that can be really critical to spurring further adoption.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think almost really right away, something that can be done is you've got to kickstart the biology back and get that going as soon as possible. So sooner the microbiome, the crop and soil microbiome recovers, the sooner you're getting all of those functions back, and you can start to, dial back on the inputs, pesticides and fertilizers.
Great. Thank you. So the other question, thanks for a very good presentation. How does improved soil health contribute to climate change mitigation efforts?
Oh, the way the way improved soil health can contribute to climate change mitigation efforts is that building soil organic matter takes carbon out of the atmosphere and puts it into the organic matter. I mean, photosynthesis is probably the single best invention ever for taking carbon out of the atmosphere and putting it into biology, and then that biology can recycle it down into the soil. So it's the changes in the soil carbon content that are helping with the carbon issue. Now, that carbon that you put in the soil with regenerative farming isn't going to stay there forever, but it can fill the reservoir up higher with carbon in the soil, which then if you maintain that regenerative farming, on average, you'll maintain more carbon in the soil over time, and that means there's less in the atmosphere. Now, estimates of how much carbon we could put in the world's agricultural lands as a consequence of new styles of agriculture, like regenerative farming, are all over the map. There's, I could go to one end of the spectrum or the other based on the assumptions people make in trying to calculate those numbers through. From what I've been able to see, there's actually a huge potential to put carbon in the ground with regenerative farming. It's not going to solve the atmospheric carbon problem, the fossil fuel problem. The numbers I don't think add up to enough to do that, but it can take a serious bite out of it in terms of somewhere between a quarter and a half of current emissions could probably be offset by a widespread adoption of these more regenerative practices. But there's only so much carbon you can put in the soil, so that it's a measure that can provide us a bridge to a low carbon energy future, but it's not going to solve the need to transition to a low carbon energy future.
Yep, and I would add that there's benefits in soil health beyond just the carbon that's stored in the soil for the climate. That more organic matter means more water retention capacity that can reduce the need to pump irrigation water, which takes a lot of energy and can release carbon. It reduces the need for nitrogen fertilizers, which require a lot of energy to manufacture and can become greenhouse gases themselves. And it to the extent that building soil organic matter involves reducing tillage, that reduces the energy consumption and the fossil fuel consumption on the farm. So
Yep.
lots of, I mean, mostly the storage, but it can cut down on fossil fuel and other kinds of emissions directly as well.
Yeah, no, Peter's absolutely right on that. It can have a huge effect on that. I mean, what we basically find among the farmers that we've interviewed who've made the transition, they can cut their diesel bill at least in half.
Yeah, and I think it's really important. Climate change is a huge issue for humanity, but it is also tapping into the human tendency to look at one single thing and forget about other aspects of a problem. And so I really like Peter's just comment on that. We get so much more than just storing carbon in the soil when we start to focus on soil health and these biological bazaars and supporting how they function.
Excellent. Okay, thank you, everyone. So there's another question. Are there scientific evidences on the link between protein quality in terms of essential amino acid profiles and regenerative agriculture? Phytochemicals, fatty acids, metabolites, and micronutrients are mentioned, but not protein quality from my understanding.
Yeah. To my knowledge, at least, no, I'm not aware of research on that, and that may well be that proteins are a macronutrient, and so they're made from whatever amino acids are going to come together in, say, the context of meat tissue and dairy, and then of course crops are making different kinds of proteins. So that's kind of my comment on that. Not that I'm aware of. Doesn't mean there isn't, though.
Okay. Thanks, Anne. Here's another interesting one. There are, in quotes, forever chemicals in soils around the world. In US, power plant sludge has been strewed on the farmers and continue to stay in the soil. How do you deal with the PFAs and the PFOs contamination?
Yeah, these are the PFAS and so on. I don't have a good answer to this other than to say that the microbial world may well hold the key to this. We know they have extraordinary genomic diversity between bacteria, fungi, archaea, and all the rest, and that in some cases microbes are used in uh, remediation instances. And I would say the problem that this person has brought up with this PFAS in soil, we're not going to be creating some giant vacuum cleaner to get all of that stuff out of there. It is going to be a matter of a microbe, I think, that has the genomic wizardry to get a hold of that stuff and metabolize it and detoxify it. Though, although I'm not saying I know where that microbe is or what it is or who they're working with, but that would be my sort of best answer for that.
And there's a similar sort of problem with heavy metal contamination in some of the early experiments in looking at returning human waste to farm fields, particularly through the city of Tacoma's TAGRO program, where they compost their municipal sewage. It found they had large amounts of heavy metal contamination originally, and what they originally had to do is take the heavy metals out of their sewage supply. So they basically went upstream and tried to limit it from actually getting in. So I mean, the single
Yeah.
best solution to the PFAS problem is that we shouldn't be using
Yeah,
it.
well, we shouldn't be getting, yeah.
Okay, maybe there's time for one last question here. Although regenerative or organic farming is good for the soil ecology, can it still be done with conventional farming with GMOs? For more communities combating food security and poverty, how can they try to be good to soil while not sacrificing the nutrition and the healthy food?
Well, the regenerative organic farming can grow as much food and it will be healthier and more nutritious. So it's not a trade-off in the first place. But you can do regenerative farming without being organic. Now, there's a lot of arguments about what the word regenerative actually means. There's less arguments about the word organic. It essentially equates to not using synthetic agrochemicals for the most part. But most of the farmers that I visited writing Growing Our Evolution were not organic farmers, and they had restored fertility to their land. The key, though, was that they used far less of the agrochemical inputs than their conventional neighbors. So they were conventional in terms of that they were not organic, but they were very unconventional in how they thought about their soil and in the practices that they put into play to basically wean themselves off of synthetic nitrogen, synthetic pesticides, herbicides, and GMO crops in a number of the cases. But a number of them were still using GMO crops. A number of them still used some level of agrochemicals and had really had remarkable results with their soil. So I think I like to think about regenerative farming as it's a different thing than organic, because regenerative farming is minimizing both physical and chemical disturbance, but not necessarily eliminating either. You can eliminate the chemical disturbance in regenerative farming, and then you're doing regenerative organic farming. And the way organic farming is usually practiced, it can involve a lot of physical disturbance, which sort of doesn't hit the mark in terms of regenerative. And all the farms I wrote about in the Dirt book, they were organic farms in terms of the ones that helped to take down the classical Greeks and the Roman Empire, et cetera, around the world, because agrochemical farming did not exist several thousand years ago. So I think that if we put building soil health as the metric through which we're sort of gauging what kind of practices to use, the practices that contribute to building soil health, whether in a regenerative or in an organic system, are the ones that really should be our North Star. We should be pursuing agricultural practices that build soil health over the long run, and helping and enabling and educating farmers about how to best do that in their own region, which could require rethinking agricultural subsidies, rethinking agricultural programs, helping to provide assistance for transition. So the long answer to that, but I think I'll leave it there.
Okay. Okay. Maybe there is a time for one small, question here. Well, actually, it's not really small, but let's see. When it comes to using animals as a part of the regenerative ag approach, how much does the methane and the nitrous oxide emissions from the animals, specifically the ruminants, counteract the carbon sequestration taking place? In short, wouldn't adding more animal negate the GHG or the greenhouse gas emissions reductions that regenerative agriculture is designed to do?
A lot of that depends on the diet of the animal. There's a number of studies that have looked at how a diverse diet of phytochemically rich greens, pasture, can actually suppress methanogens in a cow and reduce what they belch out. So one, you can manipulate the diet of the cow, what your food ate, and we go into this, I think, in the book to some degree. And so the diet of animals can actually have a big effect on that. But you also need to look at the full life cycle of what's going in to feed, say, the animals that are in feedlots, because if you include the diesel and the fertilizer and the soil degradation that went into growing the grains that feed them in feedlots, which then contribute to their methanogenesis,
Yeah.
that matters too. And it's the more you can trade off, the more you can put carbon in the soil, obviously, the better the trade-off becomes as well.
Yeah, and I think there's been, it's a hard question. There's no way that we're going to change. Well, some are trying to fundamentally change ruminant biology to get rid of these microbes in the rumen that are generating the methane that's coming out in the belching. I think that we don't know enough about what removing a whole member of the ruminant microbiome is going to do to the animal's health. And I think it's always paramount when we're talking about, whether you're talking about ruminants or chickens or swine or whatever, that we really need to do perhaps a better job of working with what is the normal biology of these animals and start from there with regard to minimizing what we perceive to be some of the issues and problems, whether that's around climate change or nutritional density. I think for the deal with animal foods is they are tremendous sources of nutrition for human beings. And this doesn't mean that we need to be eating meat every single day and overdoing it on protein, but it's one of the most bioavailable, well, it is the most bioavailable form of protein in the human diet. Ruminants, meat, fish, animals in general. So I don't know that we should be looking to eliminate. I do agree there are an awful lot of ruminants on this planet, but that's another issue.
Well, except that if you look at the total number of ruminants in North America today, it's about what it was 300 years ago. The difference is they now live in feedlots and eat corn.
Okay, point made.
Yeah, there are ways to. Sorry for interrupting, David.
No, go for it.
Yeah, there are ways to adopt more regenerative practices in livestock as well as crop agriculture. So we often associate regenerative and conservation agriculture with reduced tillage, but that's just one example of a practice. Another example from the livestock area is intensive rotational grazing, and that's not particularly high tech. It's just about changing the way the animals are herded so that the grass doesn't become overgrazed and it's a more sustainable carbon-friendly system.
And that can work. There's a ranch in North Dakota that I've been on, and we've actually measured the carbon content of, and they managed to triple their soil organic matter content over about 20 years through that style of intensive rotational grazing that Peter's describing. And it went from about 2% up to about 6%. If you did that on all the world's grazing lands, that's actually huge.
Excellent. Excellent. So in the interest of time, I need to conclude this session. Thank you once again, David and Anne, Peter, for sharing your time and expertise with us today and for the critical work you are doing in the field of sustainable agriculture and human health. Your insights into soil health, microbial diversity, and the links between farming practices and the chronic diseases have truly deepened our understanding of how closely connected these issues are to both individuals and the community well-being. And so for those of you that are interested in further exploring the topics discussed, such as the connections highlighted in the book, What Your Food Ate, we will be sending out a follow-up email with links where you can purchase the book, as well as other resources mentioned during today's discussion. So these readings will offer, valuable perspectives for anyone looking to deeper into the science of sustainability challenges that shape our global food production systems. So once again, thank you, David, Anne, and we look forward to continuing this important conversation in
Yeah,
future with both
and
of
for
you.
those who are interested, for those who are interested in learning about more about Grow Further, Venkat and I will be on to discuss that.
Great. Well,
All
thank
right.
you guys, and thanks for all you're doing to make the world a better place.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I think what we will do the next 5 minutes or how much of our time we have is just wrap it up, and I'd like to share take a quick moment here to share a little bit information about Grow Further and how you could be a part of this exciting work. As some of you may know that we are a nonprofit based in Seattle with a unique mission. We fund agriculture research projects in developing countries, focusing on helping smallholder farmers adapt to climate change and improve their income and nutrition. And what makes us really special is that we offer grants of sizable amounts on a yearly basis for up to 3 years. But the cool part is that we are looking for ideas that can help thousands or even millions of farms with a minimal investment. And so we are all about big impact and how we can impact the smallholder farmers and their socioeconomic status and their well-being in the developing world. So now, you might have heard about medical research charities, and what we are doing is much similar to that, but in agriculture. So in fact, we are the world's first public-facing agriculture research charity, which is pretty exciting. Now, let me give you a quick taste of what we are up to. We have currently, 4 projects that have already been deployed. There's a project that's currently ongoing in Ghana, which is to improve local indigenous legume species to make it from a pre-breeding material into more of a commercial material through participatory plant breeding initiative. We also have a project in Tanzania where we are using AI to help smallholder farmers spot plant diseases as early as before the symptom manifestation. And in addition to that, we have 2 other interesting projects that we recently launched in collaboration with Harvest Plus. There's a project on iron fortification in pearl millet, and also to improve drought resiliency in wheat, a project that is being funded in Ethiopia. So now I know probably most of you are wondering, how can I get involved? Well, let me tell you that, if you are an agriculture scientist and we would love to see your grant proposals. So you can just head straight to our website at growfurther.org and learn more about, the process. For everyone else that is here, that is, you want to be a volunteer or a donor, please come and talk to our team. But also, I would encourage you to, register for our newsletter and by visiting our website, which is growfurther.org. And for others that are passionate about food security, and maybe you dreamt of being a scientist, but you took a different path in your career, we would love to have you as our donor and volunteers. So please come and talk to us about those opportunities with us and our team. And for companies and organizations listening, we are always looking for CSR partnerships that can help us take the projects to the next level. So our big dream is that we want to create a whole world of ag research charities. Just like there are medical charities today, we are building a food secure future, and we would love all of you to be a part of it. So
So I think we have a question from Rai. Rai Na Allah.
okay.
Yeah,
What is the
hi.
question?
Can you hear me?
Yes, go for it.
Yes.
Right. Thank you very much. It's been nice listening to you. There's so many insights to what you're saying. I really appreciate that. My question, I think you answered a question along the way. What I was going to say about was just that I was kind of too a bit farther, but you did answer. It was about having more insight as per the grants that your firm do offer to other agricultural firms, because our firm, it's called Glow Farm, and we are located in Nigeria. So we're into hydrophobic and aerophobic farming, soilless farming, and of course you do know that this type of farming is actually very rich in terms of whatever crops is farmed at the end of the day, because it doesn't really have interactions with soil directly because of soilless, and it's also kind of helps in terms of health, promotes health and longevity at the end of the day. So I just wanted to ask people, which like I said, that you did answer. So I will just jump on the website and see about the processes of applying for grants, and also yeah, we'll take it up from there as well. Yeah. So we've also got some innovations on flow in terms of bringing in technology and how to make farming less of a hassle. That is also in process, and we'll be rounding up that in couple of months. And then as well, if it's possible for me to have a look at what you're doing in Tanzania using AI for planting and stuff like that, it will also be nice. I don't know if that's on the website, but yeah, other than that, I can say thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Rai. We do have a page on our website that describes the work in Tanzania.
Yeah, and we can follow up with you, Rai, and provide you some additional information as well. So thanks for the question. Any other questions that please unmute yourself, and you can feel free to ask any questions that you may have. Okay, I did see. Okay. All right. So
Let's see. I think we had a hand raised from Joy.
Joy, you have a question?
Yeah, you're on mute right now.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Cool. Hello. Thank you for the putting this all together. I was really excited to hear the two authors and get links to new and more books to read on the subject. But my question, I think, is in the Q&A chat thread. But one of the things that I worked with Kofi Boa in Kumasi at the No-Till Center when I was doing my Peace Corps service in Ghana, 2015 through 17. And I tell you what, he is just a phenomenal, amazing person. And I was just so pleased that you had him, like a picture of him, and I was like, oh my gosh. But during his training, I brought two groups of farmers to his training for no-till, and these farmers were used to farming conditions in the Brangahafo region. One of the things that I had a difficult time conveying to the farmers was the incentives and the efficacy of using non-edible cover crops. So, the cowpea doubles up. It's edible, and it is also a cover crop. And so it's definitely more enticing for a farmer to say, oh, that makes sense. I will grow cowpea, it will improve my soil, and I will still have food stuff to harvest and then, plant the next crop and the next crop and the next crop. But there are certain species of cover crops that really do improve the soil much better than like an edible one. How do you convince the farmers to use those non-edible cover crops? Is there a strategy
Yeah.
that you've found that helps, or it's just a matter of finding those early adopters that are willing to test it?
Well, some of our crops are useful as livestock, for livestock feed and forage. So that can be an advantage to the farmer. We haven't done any projects specifically about convincing farmers to use cover crops, to date. We have done some projects. Well, definitely projects related to crop rotations. So the Bambara groundnut in Ghana is often rotated with corn or other crops. But yeah, to date we haven't actually tried. My guess would be promoting the benefits for livestock feed. In some areas, strengthening land rights might be helpful, because that can be a barrier to making long-term investments in the land. So yeah, research, extension, land rights, better financing. All of those things might be useful in different contexts.
Yeah. And also, Peter, that you mentioned this earlier in terms of having the right policies that would really promote farmers from getting into these sort of cover crops would be very helpful. I know that camelina and pennycress are some of those that require minimal input and can be used to grow between two crop seasons. So essentially, you don't have to invest a lot of that. And for farmers, I think a good selling point is that the return on investment, right? And so if you can really bring in that piece of argument to a farmer with a minimal effort, if he's able to generate some additional extra income through his farm, I think those are the opportunities that are out there to go and have those conversations with farmers. Yeah, so Joy, that's a great question. And I know that there are a lot of other good questions that I couldn't really reach out to in the interest of time, but we will definitely go back and we'll follow up with some of the unanswered questions that were there in the chat box. I know we have exceeded our time limit here, but I'll probably take maybe there's room to take one additional question. If anyone has any question, please unmute and feel free to
or raise your
hand. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't see any hand. Peter, do you see any?
No, I don't see any hands.
So okay, but if not, thank you all for listening and participating in our conversation. We hope to work with you all soon to change the face of global agriculture. So thank you all. Please go ahead and visit our website, growfurther.org, and check out on all the projects that we are doing. And we would love to have you join us and in supporting this very impactful mission. With that, we'll conclude our session today. Thank you all.
All right.
Thank you. Bye-bye.